Let me tell you about Anthony, a 51-year-old vice president who's reached a breaking point that many successful black professionals know too well: racial exhaustion. He's tired of being the diversity hire in meetings, tired of his ideas being ignored until a white colleague repeats them, tired of smiling through microaggressions to keep his six-figure salary, but he's also terrified to speak up because he's got 2 kids in college and a mortgage that depends on him staying silent. And here's the moment that changed everything. What Anthony's 23-year-old daughter said to him that made him realize his silence wasn't protecting his family. It was teaching them to accept less than they deserve. See, we think workplace racism is about individual bad actors, about obvious discrimination that HR can handle. But what I learned from Anthony's story is that modern racism is about systems designed to exhaust you into compliance, to make you so tired of fighting that you accept being undervalued just to keep your paycheck. Let me tell you about Anthony Williams from Atlanta. He's a vice president of operations at a Fortune 500 financial services company. Went to Morehouse, got his MBA from Wharton, been with his company for 15 years, worked his way up from analyst to management. Anthony is what most people would call successful. He makes $180,000 a year, lives in a nice suburban neighborhood, has 2 kids in college, wife who's a teacher. From the outside, he's living the American dream. But here's what success looks like for Anthony on a daily basis. Every morning, he walks into that corporate office and becomes one of maybe 3 black faces in a sea of 200+ employees. In leadership meetings, he's often the only black person in the room. Steve, Anthony tells me, I spend more energy managing white people's comfort with my presence than I do actually doing my job. I have to be just friendly enough to seem approachable, but not too friendly that they think I'm not serious. I have to be confident enough to command respect, but not too confident that they think I'm aggressive. Anthony describes the subtle daily humiliations that wear him down. Colleagues who are surprised when he speaks articulately, clients who assume he's the assistant rather than the vice president, meetings where his ideas are dismissed until a white colleague presents the exact same concept 5 minutes later. Last month, Anthony says, I presented a cost-saving strategy that could save the company $2 million annually. The room was silent. Then Brad, a guy who's been there 3 years to my 15, said, that's an interesting idea. What if we tweaked it like this? And suggested the exact same thing I just said. Suddenly everyone's nodding, taking notes, calling it brilliant. The incident that brought Anthony to his breaking point happened 3 months ago. The company was promoting someone to senior vice president, a position Anthony had been working toward for 5 years. Anthony had all the qualifications, the experience, the MBA, the track record of success, the relationships with key clients. His performance reviews were exemplary. His team had the highest efficiency ratings in the company. His competition was Jason, a 38-year-old white man who'd been with the company for 8 years, had a bachelor's degree, and managed a smaller team with lower performance metrics. I thought it was a formality, Anthony tells me. My boss had been telling me for 2 years that I was next in line for senior management. I'd been mentoring newer employees, taking on extra responsibilities, essentially doing the job already. The day of the announcement, Anthony's boss called him into the office. Anthony, he said, we've decided to go with Jason for the senior VP position. You're a strong candidate, but we feel Jason brings a different kind of leadership energy that resonates well with our client base. Anthony asked what he needed to improve to be considered for the next opening. The feedback was vague. Work on your executive presence, build stronger relationships across departments, show more strategic thinking. Steve, Anthony says, they gave me feedback that was essentially telling me to be more white without saying it. Executive presence, I have an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of proven results. Strategic thinking, I've increased my department's efficiency by 40% over 3 years. That night, Anthony went home and looked at his family. His wife grading papers at the kitchen table, his daughter studying for finals, his son preparing for his senior year of high school. He realized he was working twice as hard as his white colleagues for half the recognition, and it was never going to change. The conversation that changed everything happened 2 weeks after the promotion disappointment. Anthony was having dinner with his family, and his daughter Nicole, a junior at Spelman, was telling them about a class discussion on workplace equity. Dad, Nicole said, we were talking about how successful black professionals often face invisible barriers that their white colleagues don't even know exist. The professor called it the exhaustion tax, the extra energy black employees spend navigating workplace politics just to be seen as equal. Anthony felt exposed, like his daughter was describing his exact experience. Nicole continued, "The saddest part is when Black professionals start accepting less than they deserve because fighting for equality becomes too exhausting. They convince themselves that staying silent and keeping their jobs is protecting their families." Then Nicole looked directly at her father and said something that cut him to his core. "Dad, I hope if you ever face that kind of situation, you'd fight back, not just for yourself, but for me and Kevin. Because if you accept being treated as less than equal, you're teaching us that we should accept it too." Anthony sat at that dinner table, realizing his daughter was right. His silence wasn't protecting his family. It was modeling acceptance of injustice. That night, Anthony called me. When Anthony called me, I heard something familiar in his voice. The exhaustion that comes from carrying racial burden in professional spaces where you're the only one who sees it. "Anthony," I told him, "you're not just dealing with workplace politics. You're dealing with a system that profits from your silence. Every time you don't speak up about unfair treatment, you're making it easier for them to treat the next Black professional the same way." But I also understood his fear. "I know you're scared of being labeled as difficult or playing the race card. I know you're worried about your family's financial security. But let me ask you this. What kind of security are you really providing if you're teaching your children that their worth is negotiable?" I shared with Anthony my own experiences in entertainment where I faced similar challenges early in my career. There were times I stayed quiet about unfair treatment because I was grateful to have opportunities, but I learned that gratitude for crumbs keeps you from demanding the full meal you deserve. I told him about the difference between fighting smart and fighting scared. You don't have to be the angry Black man who gets fired for speaking up, but you also don't have to be the grateful Black man who accepts scraps. There's a strategic way to demand what you deserve while building the case for change. Over the next month, Anthony and I worked together on what I call strategic advocacy, fighting for justice while protecting your livelihood. First, we documented everything. Anthony started keeping detailed records of meetings, decisions, and conversations, not to build a lawsuit, but to build credibility. "When you challenge systemic issues," I told him, "they'll try to make it about your performance or your attitude. But if you have documentation showing a pattern, it becomes about their policies, not your personality." Second, we identified allies. Anthony realized there were other employees, including some white colleagues who had witnessed the unfair treatment but didn't know how to address it. "Change doesn't happen when one person speaks up," I explained. "Change happens when multiple voices confirm what everyone already knows, but nobody's willing to say." Third, we framed the conversation around business impact, not personal grievance. Instead of "I was treated unfairly," we focused on "our promotion process is costing us talent and limiting our effectiveness." 6 weeks after our first conversation, Anthony requested a meeting with his boss and HR. But instead of going in angry or defensive, he went in strategic. "I've been reflecting on the feedback from my promotion review," Anthony said, "and I want to discuss how we can improve our leadership development process to ensure we're identifying and promoting our strongest talent." Anthony presented data showing that diverse leadership teams outperform homogeneous ones, that their company was losing talented employees who felt undervalued, and that their promotion criteria might be inadvertently favoring certain communication styles over proven results. "I'm not asking you to give me something I didn't earn," Anthony said. "I'm asking you to examine whether our current system is designed to recognize the kind of excellence I bring to this company." The conversation led to a company-wide review of their promotion process. Within 3 months, they implemented new evaluation criteria that focused on measurable results rather than subjective assessments of leadership presence. 6 months later, Anthony was promoted to senior vice president. But the real victory wasn't the promotion. It was the change in culture. The company now has mandatory bias training, structured promotion criteria, and a diversity council that Anthony co-chairs. What Anthony taught me through his journey is that fighting workplace discrimination isn't about being confrontational. It's about being strategic. Here's what every professional facing systemic bias needs to know. First, document everything, but don't make it about building a legal case. Make it about building credibility. When you can show patterns rather than isolated incidents, you're talking about systems, not personalities. Second, find allies, especially allies who don't look like you. Change happens faster when privileged voices confirm what marginalized voices have been saying all along. Third, frame your concerns around business impact, not personal grievance. Companies care about productivity, retention, and reputation. Show them how bias affects their bottom line. Fourth, know the difference between picking battles and avoiding war. You don't have to challenge every microaggression, but you can't stay silent about systemic patterns that affect your advancement. Fifth, remember that your silence protects the system more than it protects you. When you accept unfair treatment to keep your job, you're teaching your children that their worth is negotiable. If you're facing workplace discrimination right now, remember what Anthony learned. You don't have to choose between your dignity and your paycheck, but you do have to be strategic about how you fight for both. Your silence isn't protecting your family if it's teaching them to accept less than they deserve. Your compliance isn't ensuring your security if it's ensuring your stagnation. Anthony learned what every professional needs to learn. You can fight the system without letting the system destroy you, but you have to fight smart, fight strategic, and fight with the understanding that your individual battle is part of a larger war for workplace justice. The goal isn't just to get what you deserve. It's to change the system so the next person who looks like you doesn't have to fight the same battles you fought. Y'all remember that. Your career isn't just about your advancement. It's about opening doors that were closed and keeping them open for the people coming behind you. Anthony's not just a senior vice president now. He's a change agent, a door opener, and proof that you can fight for justice without sacrificing your future. That's not just success, that's leadership.